At exactly 2:10 in the morning, local time, in the pitch-black sky above the mountains of Qom province, 7 ghosts were flying. They had taken off 18 hours earlier from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, crossed the Atlantic, refueled 3 times in total darkness over the Mediterranean and the Arabian Peninsula, and spoken almost nothing to anyone since wheels up. They maintained a communications blackout so complete that their own families would only find out about the mission the same way the rest of the world did, when the mountains of Fordow started shaking. The 7 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, each crewed by 2 pilots, were closing the final distance toward a target that had been studied, modeled, simulated, and dreamed about for 15 consecutive years. Their call signs were classified. Their trajectories were classified. Their exact weapons loadout was classified, but the target was not. The Fordow Fuel Enrichment Plant, a $4 billion underground nuclear fortress carved 90 meters into solid rock beneath a mountain ridge in the Qom region, where over 2,976 centrifuges had been spinning uranium hexafluoride to 60% enrichment. One small technical step away from weapons grade. Suddenly, inside the cockpits, warning systems flickered. The passive sensor suites picked up the faintest electromagnetic residue rising from the valley floor. Somewhere below, in the mountain ridges of the Zagros, Iran's Bavar 3732 air defense batteries, the upgraded variant unveiled in February 2025, featuring independent radar-equipped Talar launcher units that could operate without a central command post, were scanning the sky. And the system's phased array radar claimed detection ranges beyond 300 kilometers. It used Sayyad 4B interceptor missiles capable of engaging targets at Mach 5+. And Iran had, just 3 months before this night, conducted full-scale drills specifically simulating the defense of Fordow and Natanz against heavy bunker buster strikes. They had drilled for this exact scenario. They had trained their crews to anticipate B-2s. And yet, the lead bomber pressed on. Because Iran's confidence tonight was built on something that no longer existed. This is the story of how 18 hours of silence ended 15 years of fear. The answer in the next 14 minutes will change the way you look at modern warfare forever. The fortress below, Iran's confidence was not blind arrogance. It was an engineering achievement. The Fordow facility is not simply an underground bunker. It is an underground city, a place so deliberately hardened that even the most senior American defense officials had privately admitted for years that conventional weapons might not be able to reach it. Built into the mountain beginning in 2006, discovered by Western intelligence only in 2009, when construction was already advanced. Fordow sits so deep beneath the earth that the only conventional weapon theoretically capable of reaching its critical infrastructure is a bomb the United States had never yet used in combat. A bomb that, in fact, was specifically designed for this single target. The facility had been stocked with nearly 3,000 IR-6 centrifuges, Iran's most advanced domestic centrifuge model, in spinning at high speed in 2 interconnected halls buried beneath hundreds of feet of rock and concrete. The uranium being processed there had already reached 60% enrichment, a level that alarmed every Western intelligence agency, because moving from 60% to the 90% required for a weapon requires far less time and technical effort than moving from 0. The IAEA had flagged the situation in successive reports through 2024 and 2025. Diplomatic channels had stalled. Indirect negotiations between the United States and Iran had broken down in April. And on June 13, 2025, Israel launched its own surprise air campaign against Iran, striking missile factories, air defense sites, and military infrastructure across the country in a 12-day blitz that would eventually be called the most consequential Israeli military operation since 1967. For 9 days of that Israeli campaign, Iran's air defenses had fought back, but they had fought poorly. The Israeli Air Force flew F-35E stealth fighters over Iranian airspace with relative impunity. Within 72 hours of the opening strikes, Israel claimed to have destroyed over 120 Iranian surface-to-air missile transporter erector launchers, roughly a third of Iran's total pre-war inventory. The Russians supplied S-300 PMU, two batteries that had been positioned around the most sensitive nuclear sites were specifically targeted. Satellite imagery confirmed destroyed radar vehicles near Isfahan and along the western approaches to Fordow. To what had once been described as a formidable layered air defense network, a combination of Russian S-300s, Iranian Bavar 373s, corded 15 medium-range systems, and Majid short-range interceptors, had been significantly hollowed out. But Iran was not helpless, and what remained was carefully hidden. The deception runs deep. 48 hours before the B-2s took off from Missouri, the United States conducted something no one announced at the Pentagon briefing, a quiet, deep digital reconnaissance of Iran's surviving air defense architecture. U.S. Cyber Command and the NSA had been probing Iranian networks for months. They had extensive signals intelligence from Israeli F-35I aircraft, which had systematically cataloged Iranian radar emissions during their overflights. They knew which frequencies Iran's Bavar 3732 acquisition radars used. They knew the fire control radar signature of the Khordad 15. They had mapped the electromagnetic environment over Fordow with extraordinary precision. The Bavar 3732, introduced by Iran in February 2025, featured a key architectural innovation. Each transporter erector launcher was now equipped with its own organic radar, capable of detecting, tracking, and engaging targets without needing to communicate with a central command post. This was Iran's answer to the vulnerability that had crippled its S-300s when Israeli electronic warfare aircraft systematically jammed and destroyed the centralized radar nodes. With the new Bavar 3732, destroying the command post would not blind the launchers. Each launcher could fight independently, using its own sensors, firing its own Sayyad 4B missiles, without waiting for instructions from above. This was a serious problem, and the United States had studied it carefully. The answer was not to try to jam the new Bavar 3732's radars, though that would be attempted. The answer was to make the new system irrelevant before it could lock on to something worth shooting. And that required a layered deception operation that began not over Iran, but over the Pacific Ocean. At midnight on Saturday, June 21st, a large formation of B-2 Spirit bombers launched from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. Some of them flew east, some of them flew west, toward Guam, into the Pacific, crossing the dateline. The westbound bombers were a deliberate deception, known to only a handful of planners in Washington and at CENTCOM headquarters in Tampa. And as the morning progressed, and airbase activity was observed by Russian and Chinese intelligence satellites, the picture that emerged suggested the B-2s were dispersing, perhaps to Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, perhaps to Anderson in Guam. The picture was wrong. The picture was exactly what the United States wanted Tehran to see. Meanwhile, the real strike package, 7 B-2 Spirit bombers, flew quietly east over the Atlantic with minimal communications, refueling 3 times from pre-positioned tanker aircraft that the U.S. Air Force had spent days positioning across Europe and the Azores. 30 tanker aircraft were staged across the refueling track. The entire air bridge had been constructed in secret, and the tanker crews were told only what they needed to know. Be at this position, at this altitude, at this exact time. Yes, and say nothing. At approximately 5 p.m. Eastern Time, around midnight in Iran, the main strike package was approaching the Persian Gulf. At that moment, a U.S. Navy submarine somewhere in the Central Command area of responsibility launched its first Tomahawk cruise missile toward Isfahan. Then another. Then another. More than 24 Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles arced upward from beneath the surface of the sea and began their subsonic terrain-following run toward the Isfahan Nuclear Technology Center on the far side of Iran, a site that processed uranium and housed research facilities, but whose primary infrastructure was above ground and therefore reachable without the GBU-57. The Tomahawks were launched last, timed to arrive at Isfahan after the B-2s had completed their run at Fordow and Natanz, to ensure the element of surprise was preserved throughout the entire operation. The fighter screen. But before the B-2s could enter Iranian airspace safely, Even accounting for their extraordinary stealth capabilities, the path had to be swept clean of whatever remained of Iran's air defenses. This task fell to the fighter package. F-22 Raptors, F-35A and F-35C, Lightning IIs, F-15E, Strike Eagles, and the most critical players in the electromagnetic arena, the EA-18G Growlers. The EA-18G Growler is the U.S. Navy's dedicated electronic warfare aircraft, built on the airframe of the F/A-18F Super Hornet, but stripped of traditional strike capability in favor of an extraordinary sensor and jamming suite. Each Growler carries ALQ-218 receiver wingtip pods that provide listen. While jamming capability, the aircraft can monitor enemy radar emissions in real time, even while actively blasting interference across the electromagnetic spectrum. It carries ALQ-99 tactical jamming pods on its wings and centerline, capable of covering frequencies from below 100 MHz to above 18 GHz. And crucially, it can carry the AGM-88 EAAR-GM, the Advanced Anti-Radiation Guided Missile, a weapon that homes in on enemy radar emissions at supersonic speed and destroys the transmitter. If an Iranian radar turns on, the AAR-GM will ride that signal straight back to its source. The Growler squadrons launched from carriers positioned in the Arabian Sea and the Red Sea. They climbed to altitude, activated their ALQ-218 receivers, and began building the electromagnetic picture over Iran. What they found matched what intelligence had predicted. The Israeli campaign had left Iranian air defenses degraded, fragmented, and, critically, reluctant to activate. After 9 days of watching radar stations get destroyed the moment they powered on, Iranian radar operators had learned a brutal lesson. Active radar was a beacon for death, and so some of the Bavar 373 batteries and the surviving Cordad. 15 units had gone cold. They sat silent. They were not emitting. They were waiting. The F-22s and F-35s pushed ahead of the B-2 formation at high altitude and high speed, sweeping the airspace. Wherever they detected the beginning of an Iranian radar scan, the Growlers responded immediately with targeted jamming. Wherever a radar persisted, AGM-88E missiles were fired. The jets fired approximately 30 munitions against Iranian air defense sites during the sweep, suppressing or destroying whatever radar capability had survived the Israeli campaign. It was aggressive, it was fast, and it was thorough. None of the Iranian systems fired back. Not a single surface-to-air missile was launched at the American strike package on the way in. The surviving Iranian air defense crews watching their radar screens light up with jamming noise and hearing the explosions as yet more battery sites were destroyed around them, made the same calculation that survival instinct dictates. Do not activate. Do not become a target. Wait. General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, would state at the Sunday morning Pentagon briefing, "We are currently unaware of any shots fired at the U.S. A strike package on the way in or on the way out." In 18 hours of flight and 25 minutes over target, the most technologically dangerous gauntlet in the world, the approaches to Iran's most heavily defended nuclear sites, was traversed without a single American aircraft taking fire. The bomb that was built for one target at 6:40 p.m. Eastern Time, 2:10 a.m. in Iran. The lead B-2 crossed the ridgeline above Fordow and opened its weapon bay doors. What fell from those doors represented the culmination of 15 years of engineering effort, computer modeling, underground testing, and institutional obsession by two officers from the Defense Threat Reduction Agency who had, in General Kane's words at the briefing, literally dreamed about this target as they slept. The GBU-57/B Massive Ordnance Penetrator is the largest conventional bomb in the operational inventory of any military on Earth. It weighs 30,000 pounds. It carries 5,300 pounds of high explosive. Its hardened steel penetrator casing is designed to punch through concrete and rock for dozens of meters before the warhead detonates. No other aircraft in the world can carry it. Its weight and size require a B-2 Spirit specifically modified internal weapons bay. When first designed, the MOP was tested against mock-ups of hardened underground facilities. It was redesigned. It was tested again. It was redesigned again. For 15 years, those two DTRA officers had monitored the vent shaft, the exhaust shaft, the electrical systems, the environmental control systems, every nook, like every crater, every piece of equipment going in, and every piece of equipment going out of Fordow. They knew exactly where to aim. The lead B-2 dropped 2 MOPs onto the first aim point at Fordow, a main ventilation shaft. The first bomb blew off the reinforced concrete cover protecting the shaft. The second bomb plunged into the now exposed opening, carrying 5,300 pounds of high explosive deep into the heart of the mountain before detonating. Then the remaining 5 B-2s followed, each dropping 2 MOPs on successive aim points. The second ventilation shaft, the electrical systems, the structural junction points. 6 bombs on 6 aim points, each working in sequence, each building on the damage of the one before. A 7th B-2, simultaneously, dropped 2 MOPs on the Natanz nuclear facility 60 kilometers to the northwest, a site that had been Iran's primary centrifuge enrichment complex for decades, where thousands of first-generation IR-1 centrifuges and advanced IR-6 machines had been spinning. The entire strike on Fordow and Natanz was complete in 25 minutes. As the B-2s banked away from the targets and headed back toward their tankers, the Tomahawk missiles from the submarine were just arriving at Isfahan, striking surface infrastructure there in a final coordinated blow. Then, silence. The B-2S exited Iranian airspace without incident. Iran launched no fighters, no radar locked on, no missile rose to meet them. The mountains fell quiet. What the satellite saw. In the hours after the strike, as the B-2 crews began their long, silent journey home, the second longest B-2 mission ever flown, exceeded only by missions from the days after September 11, 2001. The imagery analyst went to work. Commercial satellite imagery from Maxar Technologies, taken in the morning hours of June 22nd, told the story in stark visual terms. Along the ridgeline above the Fordow underground complex, large-diameter holes and craters were visible where the MOPs had entered the rock. A layer of gray-blue ash from the explosions coated a wide swath of the surrounding terrain. The tunnel entrances leading into the underground facility, the openings through which personnel, equipment, centrifuge components had entered for over a decade, were blocked, choked with collapsed rock and displaced earth. The ridgeline itself appeared altered in geometry, to the underground detonations having created voids that caused portions of the surface to subside. Iran's underground nuclear fortress had, from the outside, the appearance of a mountain that had been hollowed out and then crushed from within. Was Fordow destroyed? The answer is complicated and contested, and the complexity of that answer reveals something important about what this kind of warfare can and cannot achieve. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth declared an incredible and overwhelming success. President Trump announced the operation had completely and totally obliterated Iran's key enrichment facilities. General Kane pointed to the satellite imagery and the test footage of MOP performance as evidence of catastrophic damage. But a Defense Intelligence Agency assessment, leaked and later disputed by administration officials, suggested the attack had set Iran's program back by months rather than years. An estimate issued with low confidence, given the difficulty of assessing underground damage from above. The New York Times reported, citing a senior U.S. official who requested anonymity, that the Fordow site had been severely damaged but not completely destroyed. The Pentagon's own spokesman said the U.S. believed the strikes had degraded their program by 1 to 2 years. Satellite imagery showed trucks that appeared to have been loading up outside Fordow's entrance in the days before the strike, suggesting Iran may have moved some centrifuge components and enriched uranium stocks before the bombs fell. Iranian officials confirmed that nuclear material had already been evacuated from some of the facilities, though they gave no details on quantities or destinations. A senior Israeli official stated that enriched uranium stored at Isfahan was believed to have survived, though it may now be buried and difficult to access. The full picture remains classified. What is not classified is this: For the first time in the history of warfare, the GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator was used in combat, and the target was Fordow, the site those two DTRA officers had spent 15 years of their professional lives studying down to the last air duct. The shadow war that made it possible. Operation Midnight Hammer did not succeed because of bombs and bombers alone. It succeeded because of everything that happened before the first B-2 lifted off from Missouri. And much of what happened before is still classified. What is known, the Israeli air campaign that began on June 13, 2025, systematically dismantled Iran's integrated air defense network over 9 days. F-35I aircraft from the Israeli Air Force overflew Iranian territory, collecting electronic intelligence on every radar emission, every data link frequency, every command and control signal that Iran's defense systems produced. Israeli electronic warfare aircraft and strike packages destroyed approximately 120 Iranian surface-to-air missile launchers, a third of Iran's pre-war total. The S-300 PMU, 2 batteries that had been positioned specifically to defend the nuclear sites, batteries that the Institute for Science and International Security had identified as the primary guardians of Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan, were targeted with precision. Their radars were destroyed. Their command vehicles were destroyed. Some launchers were physically struck. Others, observing what was happening to their sister batteries, simply went dark and stayed dark. What this meant for the American strike package on the night of June 21st to 22nd was profound. The electromagnetic threat environment over Iran had been, if not eliminated, then sufficiently degraded that the combination of American stealth, American electronic warfare, and American fighter suppression was able to complete the mission without drawing fire. The Bavar 3732 batteries that survived the Israeli campaign stayed cold. Their operators had watched what happened to radar stations that activated, and they chose survival over duty. The lesson is not comfortable for anyone who prefers clean narratives. Iran spent billions of dollars building the most sophisticated domestic air defense system in its history. A system with independent radar-equipped launchers, passive sensor networks, and missiles capable of Mach 5. And on the night that mattered most, not one of those missiles left its launcher. Not because the system failed technologically, but because the humans operating it had made a rational calculation that activating their radar was equivalent to painting a bullseye on their own position. The electronic battlefield that never sleeps. While the B-2s flew and the Tomahawks ran, the electronic warfare aircraft were doing something that will never fully appear on a weapons delivery report. The EA-18G Growlers, operating from carriers in the Arabian Sea, maintained a continuous jamming umbrella over the strike route. Their ALQ-99 pods swept frequencies. Their ALQ-218 wingtip receivers listened for any sign that an Iranian radar had decided to power up and fight. The RC-135 rivet joint electronic reconnaissance aircraft, orbiting safely beyond Iranian airspace, contributed to the real-time electronic intelligence picture. With its enormous passive antenna arrays, the RC-135 can detect and characterize radar emissions across a vast frequency range, enabling rapid identification of previously unknown or repositioned Iranian systems. As the strike unfolded, the rivet joint fed real-time ELINT data to the Growlers and to the Combined Air Operations Center at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, allowing the jamming response to be precisely tailored to whatever Iran showed. What Iran showed that night was silence. And the silence was louder than any missile. The EA-37B Compass Call, the Air Force's dedicated cognitive electronic warfare platform, based on the converted Gulfstream G550 airframe, orbited at the edge of Iranian airspace performing a different kind of work. Attacking the command and control communications that connect Iran's surviving air defense units to their headquarters. The Compass Call does not jam radars in the traditional sense. It attacks the electromagnetic nervous system, the data links, the voice communications, the encrypted command channels, that allow a distributed air defense network to function as a coordinated whole. If the Growlers were blocking Iran's eyesight, the Compass Call was cutting the phone lines. A battery that cannot see clearly and cannot receive updated targeting from a command post is a battery fighting blind, alone, and confused. None of this was publicly detailed at the Pentagon briefing. General Kane spoke of high-speed suppression weapons and deception tactics without elaborating. The specific electronic warfare architecture of Operation Midnight Hammer remains officially classified, but the outcome speaks for itself. 125 aircraft entered, operated over, and exited Iranian airspace over the course of 25 minutes of actual engagement, and Iran fired nothing. The aftermath in Tehran, Iran's response came fast, and it underscored both the regime's fury and its newly exposed limitations. On June 23rd, Iran launched short and medium-range ballistic missiles at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, the U.S. military's primary regional hub and headquarters of U.S. Central Command. The missiles struck the base. American officials reported no U.S. casualties, crediting a combination of active missile defense systems, Patriot PS-3 batteries and terminal high-altitude area defense assets positioned around Al Udeid, with intercepting or deflecting the inbound warheads. But the attack demonstrated something important. Iran's ballistic missile force, its most strategically survivable retaliatory arm, remained substantially intact. The American strikes had targeted nuclear enrichment infrastructure, not missile storage sites, not IRGC Aerospace Force launch facilities, not the deep bunkers where Iran's Fateh and Fatah missiles waited. The Iranian parliament voted on June 22nd to close the Strait of Hormuz, the choke point through which approximately 20% of global oil supply and 22% of global natural gas trade passes. Yet the ultimate decision rested with the Supreme National Security Council, and as of the U.S. brokered ceasefire announced on June 24th, the strait remained open. But the vote itself sent a signal. Iran was still capable of escalation that could destabilize global energy markets, and it knew that this threat remained potent, even if its nuclear enrichment infrastructure was in ruins. President Trump, following the successful strike, warned Iran of far greater attacks if peace did not come quickly, adding, "There's no military in the world that could have done what we did tonight, not even close." He signaled that future strikes could target other sites with precision, speed, and skill. The strategic message was clear. The United States had chosen a narrow surgical option this time. It had not attacked IRGC bases, not struck missile manufacturing sites, not targeted regime leadership. The restraint was deliberate, and deliberate restraint implies a credible threat to exercise less restraint in the future. General Kane warned Iran against retaliation. "Our forces remain on high alert and are fully postured to respond to any Iranian retaliation or proxy attacks, which would be an incredibly poor choice." Defense Secretary Hegseth echoed the message. The United States does not seek war. The unresolved question. The most important and most unsettling question from Operation Midnight Hammer is not tactical. It is not about the GBU-57's penetration depth, or the EA-18G's jamming range, or the B-2's radar cross-section. It is this: where is the uranium? Iran had been enriching uranium to 60% purity at Fordow for years. It had accumulated a stockpile of highly enriched material, not yet weapons grade, but within technical reach of it. Western intelligence agencies tracked some of this stockpile, but not all. In the days before the strike, satellite imagery showed trucks moving around outside Fordow's entrance. Iranian officials confirmed that nuclear material had been evacuated before the strikes. The IAEA issued statements expressing concern about the status of Iran's enriched uranium inventory. A senior Israeli official confirmed that enriched uranium believed to be at Isfahan may have survived the Tomahawk strikes. The Center for Strategic and International Studies assessed, in the weeks after Midnight Hammer, that while Iran's enrichment capability had been severely degraded, the existence of already enriched material meant that a significant barrier to weaponization has already been overcome. Without operational centrifuge halls at Fordow and Natanz, Iran cannot easily produce more enriched uranium. but the material that was already enriched to 60%, a level from which weapons grade is a relatively short technical sprint, may still exist somewhere in an unknown location. This is the enduring paradox of striking hardened nuclear infrastructure. You can collapse the vent shafts, you can block the tunnel entrances, you can turn the underground city into a concrete tomb, but you cannot bomb knowledge out of existence. And you cannot be certain that everything inside the tomb was there when the bombs fell. What the mission proved: 7 B-2 Spirit bombers flew 18 hours from Missouri, refueled 3 times in darkness, crossed the airspace of a nuclear-ambitious regional power, dropped 14 of the most powerful conventional bombs ever used in combat, and returned home without a single aircraft lost. Not a single American pilot killed. Not a shot fired at the strike package. The largest B-2 operational strike in the history of the United States Air Force, a mission that General Kane called the second longest B-2 mission ever flown, was completed with an efficiency that, to the outside observer, could appear almost routine. It was not routine. It was the product of 15 years of target analysis, years of joint U.S.-Israeli training exercises. The two air forces had conducted a rehearsal as recently as 2024 under the Biden administration. Months of tanker pre-positioning, weeks of electronic intelligence collection, 9 days of Israeli air defense suppression, and the accumulated technological advantage of a military that has never stopped investing in stealth, electronic warfare, and precision weaponeering. The mission proved something else: that in modern warfare, the electromagnetic spectrum is as decisive a domain as the physical one. The reason the B-2s flew through Iranian airspace uncontested was not that Iranian radar operators couldn't see them. Stealth reduces radar cross-section dramatically, but it does not make an aircraft invisible. It is that the combination of Israeli pre-strike destruction of radar nodes, American electronic warfare jamming of surviving emitters, and the rational fear instilled in Iranian operators by 9 days of watching radar stations get destroyed the moment they powered on. This combination created a window of electromagnetic permissiveness through which the B-2s flew. The bombs were the ending. The electronic warfare was the story. And at the heart of the electronic warfare story is a truth that will shape every future conflict. The side that controls the electromagnetic environment controls the outcome. Not necessarily the side with the most missiles, not the side with the most soldiers. The side that can see, communicate, and coordinate, while preventing the enemy from doing the same, wins. Iran's real panic, in the days after Midnight Hammer, was not about losing Fordow. Fordow could, theoretically, be rebuilt. It was about realizing that for 18 hours, a formation of American aircraft had flown undetected across international airspace and over Iranian territory, and the most capable indigenous air defense system Iran had ever built. The Bavar 3732, with its independent launchers, its passive sensors, its Sayyad 4B missiles, had not fired a single round in defense of the nation's most precious strategic asset. The mountains were intact. The air defense systems were intact. The missiles were still in their tubes, and Fordow was rubble. The EA-37B Ghost Rider turned back toward Al Udeid at dawn, its 7 crew members exhausted, their mission accomplished without a shot fired in their direction. The Growlers recovered to their carriers. The B-2 pilots, who had not told their families where they were going, who had not said goodbye in any way that would imply danger, began the long flight home to Missouri. They landed. They were debriefed. Their names will never be public. Operation Midnight Hammer was over. The full-scale hot war, at least for now, had been averted by a U.S.-brokered ceasefire on June 24th. But a new era had unambiguously begun. An era in which the combination of stealth and electronic warfare and 15-year-old patient target intelligence can reach 90 meters underground in the heart of a mountain on the other side of the world. Iran still has centrifuge knowledge. It still has missile forces. It still has enrichment scientists and IRGC aerospace engineers. The war for Iran's nuclear future did not end on June 22nd, 2025. It simply entered a new phase, one in which the mountains are no longer a guarantee of safety, one in which turning on a radar is an act of courage that may cost you everything, and one in which the B-2s will always know the way back to Missouri.